Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Coven to Astro School. And today I am here with something that we've been cooking this for like a little while. So I'm very excited it's finally come together. And we're doing the astrology of Riot Grrrl, which is so awesome. And I'm here with Laura, who is a great astrologer over in their neck of the woods. I'm going to allow you a second to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your practice, and then maybe you can answer for us, what is Riot Grrrl?
Oh, great question. Well, it's nice to be with you here, B. And yeah, I'm a really big fan of your work and how you kind of bring together music and astrology in a way that's both inspiring and also pretty nostalgic for me with some of the things. But also like I feel like I'm like learning and connecting deeper. So I really enjoy getting to know your work a bit more in that way. So my name's Laura Campagna, and I am a practicing astrologer in Boston, Massachusetts. I was born and raised here, but I lived in Ohio and New York and San Francisco. And those are some of the places I came in contact with Riot Grrrl in my youth. And then I practice probably more what's considered traditional or Hellenistic, but I have a background in gender studies and creative writing. So I'm very interested in the mythic poetic, and I do a lot of work with asteroids. And yeah, I have been thinking a lot about my own experience with Saturn going through Pisces the last time when I was it was a formative time in my life, and it really brought me into this period thinking about the Riot Grrrl movement. So that's kind of what led me to this topic.
That's awesome. I feel like for me, when you approached me with this topic, I was so excited. I mean, I was young when Riot Grrrl became,
Yeah.
but it was like perfect age to be in junior high and discover Riot Grrrl. And I remember like both emulating Kathleen Hanna and Kat Bjelland, who were like my idols by that point. Kat Bjelland's, I think Mercury and Mars are 3 Capricorn, which is my south node. So past life connection. And then like reading everything I could on Riot Grrrl or any of these bands. And like, I remember reading something where Courtney Love said something about Kat, how she grew up reading the Bell Jar and, you know, drinking Kahlua and chocolate milk or something. So I remember like specifically going to Warner's Books in the book in the bookstore in my mall and purchasing the Bell Jar at 12.
Amazing.
And just wanting to emulate that energy. So yeah, I feel like it was very formative to my own beliefs. I have Chiron in my 9th house. So my path in life was very much informed by what I was consuming musically, because, you know, this is a Venus ruled house for me. So yeah, music taught me values.
Oh, cool. That's such a nice way of saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to have this conversation. How did you come to Riot Grrrl? You were actually kind of more involved. Like you're a bit older than me. You were lucky enough to be born in a particular time and place. Can you tell us a little bit about how you discovered Riot Grrrl personally and like what it meant to you?
Yeah. So I grew up just outside Boston, and I was in high school when I was like in junior high and high school when Riot Grrrl was really getting started. And I was a little too young to kind of be involved or like exposed to it immediately. I was exposed to the punk scene in Boston a little bit in high school, and I actually found it kind of intense and intimidating for a lot of the reasons that I think Riot Grrrl was founded and started. And I gravitated more towards folk music. And but I ended up going to Antioch College in Ohio, which was like a revolutionary hotbed in the mid 90s. And on my floor in 96, there was Sarah McCool, who is this zinester from Pittsburgh, I think, who had actually like been really involved in Riot Grrrl from the beginning and had been on like national talk shows. And so I kind of met someone who was there that really got me interested in, Kill Rock Stars records. But I definitely came into it more through homocore bands, and ended up getting exposed to a lot more of that in the late 90s when I lived in New York. So I think that in many ways, the values of Riot Grrrl were really foundational to my political sensibilities and my identity. And at the time, that's just what's going on. You don't really know, oh, this is kind of special. Something different is happening and it's a little special. And like, maybe we should, you don't understand things like before they, sorry, my light's doing something weird, but I think it's okay. In the moment. So it's nice also to have this retrospective.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like it was such a special time. I mean, I just think about people who have Pluto in Pluto. For anyone who's very new to astrology, I'll do some pop-up video. Remember how they had the little bubbles on the screen? So like Pluto is change, transformation. It's a generational planet, and Libra is harmony, music, things that are aesthetically pleasing and that we enjoy. And so people who were born from like 1972 to about 1983, they have Pluto in Libra. So this was a very formative time. I mean, you have to think about this generation. They were either, going to college, or then having those first kind of formative experiences there. Or, they were in their 20s and they were, creating their families or, creating their career. So this was a really formative time for that generation, but also a very formative time for like people who are Pluto in Scorpio generation, which would be millennials. So, they're coming of age in many ways, having to talk about and transform the taboo, what we're not supposed to talk about: sex, death, taxes, rape culture, all of these things. And Riot Grrrl was just such a beautiful way for us to talk about what we're not supposed to talk about, but also to do it in an independent style and putting the tools back in the people. So I think that's a big thing. And that's like what zines are like, really like what compelled me as a kid, because it was like, oh, you don't need a book deal to be a writer. You don't need to make art that, impresses everybody, to be an artist. You just have to make art. You just have to write. And so I loved and connected with that immediately. So Riot Grrrl, I guess we could start at the beginning. Like, it started through zines. There's like a very distinct connection between the movement. And so it started at Evergreen College, really, as the story goes. And I'm sure you'll tell it a little bit better, but like Kathleen Hanna, who was like there as an arts student, she wanted to create performative art. And so she was doing these performative art pieces. If you can watch the film The Punk Singer, you can actually watch some of this, and it's really compelling. I'm a very emotional sponge. So like within like 30 seconds of that film, you're like in it with her. She's such a compelling speaker. And something I really loved and appreciated about her, that they do detail quite a bit in these in this film, is she has a very distinct voice. She has almost a Valley Girl accent, and she speaks a little bit childish. When she's speaking, it's very discerning, because you can hear these very powerful words, but the voice sounds very young. And I think that kind of adds to that aesthetic. I think about the aesthetic of these women too. Like they were kind of wearing like the Little Mermaid shirts and barrettes in their hair. And that was very much a juxtaposition for some of their political messages. So a lot of her art was initially, her performative art was about the things we're not supposed to talk about rape culture, about an event that happened to her and her roommate, and it really affected her. And then somebody says to her, well, if this is what you want to do, why don't you start a band? And that's like the aha moment. And I guess with that question, why don't you start a band? That's the beginning of Riot Grrrl, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that person who said that to her was feminist author Kathy Acker. And so, like, what a person to say that to you. And then it feels like that became the question for everyone, right? And so, you know, yeah, Riot Grrrl began in the late 80s, early 90s, and it kind of developed concurrently in Washington, D.C. and Olympia, Washington. Where Kathleen Hanna had ties to both location, and there's the incredible Evergreen College that is, you know, was founded with a really social justice mission. And it came out of this dissonance between all of these women, all of these girls who were born in the late 60s, early 70s, who were kind of told en masse for the first time, like, you can be anything you want. You know, like, I remember growing up with like Free to Be You and Me, and like being told, like, you can do anything, like everything's possible for everyone, right? That's kind of what came out of the civil rights movement, is this like idea of the 60s that, like, you know, we're going to change society and we're going to be that change. But then you have the actual reality, which is that as you grow up in society, if you have a marginalized identity, if you're female bodied, like, you're under attack. And it's not just, you know, what Riot Grrrl was really pretty immediately responding to were issues of objectification and sexual violence and, you know, interpartner violence, and, you know, all of the stuff that folks were growing up with that they didn't have any community support, like no parental support, no community support, the way that we can think about certain things now. And there's a lot of really wonderful, I think, initiatives that we take for granted, and we can credit to Riot Grrrl, and hopefully we'll think about that. But yeah, I think that there's kind of three interesting ways to think about Riot Grrrl in terms of the astrology of the moment that I've been exploring a bit. And one of them is Saturn's progression through its home signs, and that Riot Grrrl went through its Saturn return when Saturn entered Aquarius, and really like when it entered Capricorn, because that was the founding when like Bikini Kill was formed in 1990. But you know, then when Saturn moved into Pisces, you have the movement becoming from the beginning, mainstream media was trying to co-opt it because, like you were saying, these were young women who were proclaiming their bodily autonomy and their right to be sexual, to be angry. A lot of the folks that are, you know, that were foundational in the movement had a lot of Libra placements, had a lot of Scorpio placements, had a lot
Cancer of too. I was thinking about like that opposition. Like, I was just thinking about Toby Vale's chart for just a second, who is the drummer for Bikini Kill.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's a Cancer sun, and I'm thinking about like literally that's so like your sun, your energy, your vitality is in an opposition to the man, to establishment during that transit.
Yeah, I just pulled it up for if we want to.
Sorry, I interrupted for a second.
No, it's great.
It's a perfect example of, like, for anyone who's new to astrology, Cancer is like the family, and it is emotional energy. And so, you know, just thinking about like the idea of like family values, a lot of like what Bikini Kill also sung about was like things like incest and things like that. And you know, gross fathers, you know, having any sort of autonomy over their daughter's body, you know, like that was something that they confronted pretty head on. Even just like like I think about the song Carnival, which is like, you know, just about a family friendly event, you know, and just like a flip side of that, like so much of Bikini Kill's message was kind of like flipping that on its head, you know?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and it's interesting because we don't have the exact birth time for Toby Vale. So, but when we look at, okay, who's ruling this Cancer sun, the moon is in Libra, And so is Jupiter in an exact conjunction with Uranus. So the Uranus, like Riot Grrrl had very revolutionary aims and ideals. It wanted to end sexism. The work of the 70s had not ended sexism. The movement had gotten co-opted by mainstream feminists who weren't doing a particularly effective job and weren't really interested in youth or girls' empowerment or grassroots mobilization. And those were central things to Riot Grrrl, was grassroots and, just starting with where you are. And when we look at the chart of a lot of the founding folks, we see Uranus really prominent, conjunct other planets. So with Toby Vale, it's right there conjunct Jupiter in Libra and in a conjunction with that moon. I'm wondering. Great. So we had a little technical moment, and now we're back to look at Kathleen Hanna's chart, because we were looking at Toby Vale, who is one of the original kind of feminist zinesters, and who was in a relationship with Kurt Cobain, and was one of the founders of Bikini Kill. But we also, and so seeing that really prominent Uranus Jupiter moon conjunction in Libra, and then here we have Kathleen Hanna's chart. So I'm using the chart that is like kind of widely known on the internet. I know that you have theories about Kathleen Hanna's chart.
She tweeted that she was born the same day as Tanya Harding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I looked at that chart, and it makes the timing of her at Evergreen a little off. So I decided to just go with this one. I did try to do some digging, and I wasn't successful. But if I ever am successful,
Scorpio energy, such a mystery.
I know. And my Scorpio energy is like, I see you that mystery, and I will, try to solve it. So we'll find out. More will be revealed, hopefully. But using November 12th, 1968 for Kathleen Hanna, we see that Mars, so Kathleen Hanna has Mercury in Scorpio with the Sun and Neptune, and they're all pretty spaced a little bit far apart, but it's although Scorpio planets are being ruled by Mars in the traditional rulers, Mars in Libra conjunct Uranus. So here again, we're seeing this really strong Uranian energy of rebellion, the one who wants to break with the status quo, the one who is not afraid to say the thing, the one who is like smash the state, heads will roll. And just because this is the way things have always been done does not mean that's the way we have to keep doing it. And one of the things that I loved in The Punk Singer that also I felt like supported the idea that Kathleen Hanna had Mercury in Scorpio is she talks about how she would imagine her voice being a bullet, and it would like come out and it would like hit the target. And I was like, that's the most Scorpio and Mercury kind of like energy of your voice. And so yeah, we see here that Kathleen Hanna has Saturn in Aries, so in fall, in depression. So both of the malefics are not having the best time. And I think that when you study astrology and you kind of start to look at, okay, how are things lining up in my chart? It can be a little bit discouraging when you're like, oh, I don't have my planets are not in the best places, or like, I don't have a setup for like everything to be going well, but you might already know that because it's your life if things have been difficult. And having, especially like malefics out of sect, having planets out of sect, it gives you this really, I think, unique sensitivity to what is unfair and unjust with Mars and Libra, or what is the like pitfalls and the downfalls of just being an individual who's only for themselves. And Kathleen Hanna, as you know, the definitely the front facing person of Bikini Kill, as much as it was a collective, was also such a leader in the movement and really like put herself and her body out there in such a fearless and courageous way. And we see, you know, the moon in Leo is going to enjoy that kind of performance and that showmanship, but there's also a lot of violence and vitriol and you know, danger at times coming her way because she's espousing this feminist agenda that, you know, women should have a place in music, that girls should have a space in the clubs at the front, that people should be safe to say and do what they want to say and do, even if they're critiquing the patriarchy and things that other folks don't like. So yeah, I particularly like this chart also because the Venus retrograde gets involved with the founding of Riot Grrrl, and then it kind of triggers this chart in a particular way a few years later.
I would love to hear about that. One thing I was thinking about just as we were looking at this chart is also that Jupiter at the anaretic degree. And like you think about, again, that thing about her voice being a bit of a bullet. Like, what is it aimed towards? It's aimed toward justice. It's like having the oven on broil. Like when you hear her voice, that's the vegan cheese on top of your dish getting broiled. Like that's, you know, you gotta like pay attention to that. It's going to be quick. And if you don't, it's going to get burnt, you know? So that's kind of, you know, also something I think that's very interesting. And granted, like some astrologers would say, you know, it's not within 2 degrees of Pluto. So technically it's not a tight conjunction, but a conjunction nonetheless. And I think Pluto, again, you look at what she is seeking justice for. She is seeking justice for people trying to take her power away, from people trying to overpower women's sexuality, their autonomy, all of these things. And also, I just think that, like, if we think about Jupiter as that planet of higher education, she's at Evergreen College. How is she paying for this? She's also working as a stripper. She's also like having to deal with the social politics of working as, you know, in the sex field, while also trying to be a feminist. And at that time, this was a conflicting thing for her. I mean, she paved the way so millennials can, you know, basically do the same thing. But back then people thought, you know, it wasn't very feminist to show your body, to do porn, to be a stripper. And because, you know, there's all this, but that dialogue has certainly changed over the last 25 years. And I think that's partially to people like Kathleen.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think to your point about Pluto, I mean, that Pluto is also, Venus is moving out of a square, right?
Yeah.
Venus in Sagittarius. So we see that influence of Pluto there. And when we look at the chart of the, what's considered kind of the founding of Bikini Kill, October 15th, 1990, I think when they played a historic show in Olympia, we see all this Libra, right?
Yeah.
We see Mercury in a partile conjunction with Venus, which is, you know, like making art and speaking beautifully and saying things in a way that captures people's attention and imagination. Yeah, in a
and
tight
also
conjunction
I
with
have
the
to
sun.
say, like, the sun is at 22 degrees, and that, like, specifically if you're into degree theory, is a very important degree in the fixed sign. Some people call it like the kill or be killed degree. And so it is very much, you know, when this degree is hit, we do tend to see a lot more rise in like violence, but also like this is a conversation about violence and the stopping of violence and the awareness of violence. So like I just think all this stuff is so potent. Also, I just want to say too, I think that this is extraordinarily interesting if this is like, you know, a very pivotal moment for this band, because also I'm not sure if you're aware, but like Chiron, when it went into Taurus,
Mhm.
it stood at the 22-degree mark for a very long time due to a
Oh.
retrograde. So a lot of people have that degree as their Chiron, their wound. And so if in some ways, like this message that she's putting out into the world really is helping, you know, people across the world in different ways, in ways she might not even be aware of fully at that moment.
That's beautiful. Yeah, the Via Combusta is not easy for the lights. And yeah, so I think that just looking at another chart that I'm particularly interested in was how the here I'll bring up Girls
Sure.
Night. So the summer of 1991 was really important for Riot Grrrl. And a lot of folks, when you hear, let's see. When you hear, so the summer of 1991 was really pivotal for Riot Grrrl. That was when Bikini Kill was touring with Nation of Ulysses, and Bratmobile, which was another seminal band, got together in the spring, and the members of Bratmobile created the first Riot Grrrl zine that was disseminated on July 4th, 1991 in Virginia. So there was a lot going on at that time. And there was also what came to be known as Girls Night at this international punk convention show that happened in Olympia. And so August 20th, we can think about it as this really powerful inception moment when Venus has gone retrograde in Virgo. And this is also when Kill Rock Stars comes forward, and that is a record label that was created by Slim Moon, who went on to distribute all of these Riot Grrrl bands. So what we see here in this chart is Venus retrograde in Virgo. So Venus is in fall or depression in Virgo and is retrograde. And what we know about Venus retrograde is that it's a time when we reassess our values, when we think about, what do I actually care about? What does this actually mean? Are things in alignment and integrity for me within my relationships? And we have a Venus retrograde in Leo this summer, so I think that this is incredibly timely. But also, you know, Venus and Virgo is not afraid to talk about what isn't working. Virgos have a really good knack for honing in on what they don't like and where things are not meeting they're up to their expectations in a particular way. And so this Venus and Virgo retrograde at this chart is really showing us that there is a cultural shift and change, because Venus retrogrades can bring about like a change in consensus around what do we all believe about women or femininity or gender or sexuality, or if it's okay to show your body. You know, Virgo is said to be a modest sign that kind of like saves its sexuality for the people it connects with. But so you have these folks who are taking off their clothes on stage and then writing the word slut on their stomach. So there's both this, I'm going to do what I want, which is show my body, but I'm also going to, in the great tradition of feminist art, you know, name what the label that you would put on me for doing this, or name what you're thinking about me or what you might say about me later as a way to subvert that male gaze and flip that narrative. So I think we can see that here with the fact that both Venus is retrograde in Virgo, Mercury is retrograde in Leo.
It's hitting this exact same degree, my friend. Have you thought about that? Like, so Venus retrograde, which will be happening shortly. Let's say Venus is already at this time of this recording, it is already in Leo, and it will go retrograde at the 28th or 27th degree. So this is just an incredible analogy as to where like the culture is now. We're thinking about so many of these same topics, but just in a very different way. And you know how much history has pushed forward, it's now pushing backwards with what's going on in the Supreme Court right now, with women's bodies, with abortion rights, all of these things. So it's just interesting. It's literally the same degrees.
Yeah, it is. And what's really fascinating to me is that the moon is in an exact conjunction with Uranus in Capricorn and Neptune. So the Neptune Uranus conjunction in Capricorn is a definitive signature of millennials, right? And what I think is really fascinating, exactly what you're talking about. So this is a time when a lot of the millennials were born, and then just went through their Saturn return, when the rights and the battles that Riot Grrrl was like really championing around, reproductive justice and freedom and sexual liberation and autonomy, all of these things got rolled back in a terrifying way 30 years later at the Saturn return, of when this grassroots movement was really drawing attention to the fact that, hey, the mainstream powers that be are not doing enough to address these issues. And I'm sure folks are very familiar. Let me see if I have it nearby. I kind of got it out for this, with Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. Yeah, which is such a my book got all rained on, so it looks even more loved. Which is such a seminal text about the outer planets. But, he really says that Uranus and Neptune together bring about a cultural renaissance. They really shift the way that we're thinking about arts and culture and spirituality in an important way, like new philosophical avenues are opened up. And what's really interesting to me is the things that people take for granted now, like the concept of consent. The first sexual offense prevention policy, the like first time that a college made consent part of the standards, was Antioch College in 1990. And so during that time, that was like mocked on SNL. That was like tremendous ridicule throughout the whole country. And now that's something that people generally are like, yeah, I mean, obviously not everyone, and not Brett Kavanaugh, but like, a lot of people are like, yeah, consent. What a great idea. So it's, I think, really interesting to think about this Saturn return in terms of like how much I think Riot Grrrl changed the culture, but how much has changed in negative ways with the structure.
For sure. I think like very much, I mean, on a broad, it's hard to not talk about Riot Grrrl without like mentioning kind of briefly as like an afterthought, the life of Kurt Cobain, but because he is very much tied to the scene, and I don't want to spend much time on a man during this conversation, but I think about the influence all the time of his North Node being in Taurus, and how much like that was a pivotal moment for people my age. Like the values shifted, and on so many levels, on the level of, him introducing Riot Grrrl to the world through his influence. Of course, it ends up in liner notes, it ends up in thank yous, it ends up as like a footnote in his story, but that influence women around the world who were, just becoming women for the first time and understanding what it is to be a woman. I was one of those women. So, that was very influential. But like also, I think that there were many different things that were happening at that time culturally that, they might have just been for some people entertainment, but for many people, it was really instituting new ideas, new morals, new values, what family values is to millennials. And there's a real culture shift there. And music and TV and film, though they brought up, even just in the silly way of like selling out. What is selling out? That was a big thing in the 90s.
Yes.
But, I mean, but at the same time, it brought up this conversation of like consumption and like what we're spending our money on. And you see now, like, it's so much more common to meet people who are like, vegan or proud feminists. And whereas, that was a weird thing. And when my sister, who was born in the 1960s, was going to college, it's just a different world entirely. And, so I think that the root of this, the takeaway from this really is that, everyone, I don't care who you are. I don't care what your birth chart looks like. I don't care how little power you think that you have. Everyone on this planet has the power to create universal change. And it can start with one small thing. It can be as literal as, I'm just not going to eat meat anymore because I don't want to contribute to, that's a feminist issue that we can dive whole into that. It can be, I'm just going to be more aware. I'm going to ask people their pronouns first, to make them feel comfortable. Whatever decision it is, I'm going to choose not to judge somebody who does something that, isn't necessarily in my comfort zone. I think I froze for a second.
No, you're good.
You're myself froze, but I hear my voice.
I see.
Yeah. So like you have the power to create incremental change. Like when you think about it, like these are women who were 19, 18, 19, 20 years old. They were in college. They were not like movie stars. They were not, you know what I mean? These were college students that made a difference in the culture of the world, that a 12-year-old girl reading Rolling Stone magazine in her room, trying to figure out who she is, could, be like, oh, I want to be like this person. I want to be like Kathleen Hanna. I want to be like Toby Val. This is an important issue. I'm going to read about this more. I'm going to be the one girl in my junior high school that shows up and writes sled on my arm and carries a lunchbox. And that's who I was, and it created a conversation, some good, some bad, but like, ultimately it was a conversation that I started, and that changes the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that shift from Saturn and Capricorn to Saturn and Aquarius, where you have all these folks that are like, okay, the system, the establishment is not working for us. We are going to go and create our own autonomous cells. Everyone is a Riot Grrrl. Riot Grrrl is whatever you want it to be, like the slogan, every girl is a Riot Grrrl. And we're going to do this through zines. So like handwritten, and like, mailed and distributed mini magazines. Huh?
It creates a network of people who
Exactly.
are working together in a very DIY. Like if you ever want to feel your power, make a zine. If you ever want to feel like your words can change the world, write them down. Like that's my philosophy. You do not need a degree to be a writer. You do not need a book deal to be a writer. You do not need to go to art school to be an artist. What you need is to just make art and be you and experiment and make bad art, make terrible art, because you're going to learn something from it. And you know what I mean? Like that's really the spirit of punk rock and the spirit of Riot Grrrl. So I have a question, like thinking about this Venus retrograde that we're stepping into, like, what do you feel is like a powerful message, a powerful exercise that we could all possibly do to really utilize that energy with the spirit of Riot Grrrl?
Oh, I love that question. Thanks. Yeah, because, this Venus retrograde is hitting on the Riot Grrrl retrograde of 91. So because it started in Leo. So I mean, for me, I think that part of what attracted me to thinking about this time was these are folks who were going through a hard period and who came out into Saturn and Pisces, and there was all this juiciness and creative explosion, right? And whether the original Riot Grrrls felt like, oh, our movement got co-opted, or like it became so diffuse it didn't mean what it originally meant, we did then see the proliferation of like women in music as a concept, the Lilith Fair, like all of the things. Like I see it like all the way with like Beyonce at the Super Bowl performing with the word feminist behind her as part of that trajectory. And so thinking about where we are now, having come out of our own like really hard, difficult time with Saturn going through its own signs and now in Pisces, and then having a Venus retrograde, it's like, okay, things are, you can say that they are worse in many ways politically, but culturally, there is so much possibility because of, the babies that were born during this Riot Grrrl inception that are now adults who have gone through their own Saturn return that have and are changing the world with their artistic vision and creativity. So I feel like patriarchy and depression and isolation and feeling really ground down by the system can super inhibit the imagination. And so what I hope for this Venus retrograde is that there's a way in which people like reconnect with joy. And I know that when I was first starting to make scenes, I was like, this is stupid. Nobody's going to want to write it. I don't have anything to say. And then I'd be like, and it feels so good to get it out. So I hope exactly like what you're saying, like people just express themselves and share it, even if just like only a few people ever see it, because then you've made that connection, you've strengthened that web, right?
Absolutely. I'm curious. So like, what do you think is the definitive three, like if somebody were to ask you, like, what are the definitive three transits that brought on Riot Grrrl? Would you say it's in part the Uranus-Neptune conjunction? Would you say it's the Venus retrograde? What are the three most important aspects that were happening for, let's just say, revolution?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I love that question. I have Uranus on the ascendant. I'm here for it.
Nice.
Yeah. So I thought about this a lot because I do think it's Saturn in Aquarius in a big way with we're just going to do it ourselves, with that DIY ethos, with like, we don't need you. We don't even want to participate in the system. We are like, anyone can be a musician. Anyone can be in a band. Everyone is a writer. Everyone is an artist. You want to like make something happen, do it yourself. Like it's the outsiders creating their own system to live in. And then of course the mainstream is like, ooh, what are you doing over here? So the culture that's created within that structure was so potent, I think, because of Uranus and Neptune. And I think the Venus retrograde kind of like, to me, I think of it as like a little bit of the spark, right? Because Nevermind did come out, like Smells Like Teen Spirit, like came out just like a couple days before Venus stationed direct. And so that really exploded grunge into the world. So I do think of Saturn and Aquarius as being that, because I was trying to say like, when is the Saturn return? Like, are we still in it? But then I decided it was really like Saturn and Aquarius was kind of the original Saturn return, and now we're in more of the moment of mainstream dissemination. So those would be the three things, with the Venus retrograde kind of being the spark, the match that sets it off.
Yeah. What do you think was is there an end to Riot Grrrl? What was like kind of the wind down? Would you say it would be like Bikini Kill no longer being a band, and like I guess Latigra kind of coming up, or I guess before that it was Julie Ruin.
Mhm.
Or would you say that Riot Grrrl never died? Or maybe there's just, different incarnations of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question too, because I think that you get all these spin-offs from it, like Homocore, and then Mr. Lady Records with Team Dresch, Kyle Wilson, with the Butchies, and all of these folks that were connected with I think with Riot Grrrl and a lot of the founders who then went on to do things for a very long time. I don't think it ever really died. I definitely think a lot was happening into the early aughts, but I do think there was kind of a change, especially in some of the major cities that we could see after not entirely. I mean, I think 9/11 just changed a lot of things.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Do you think, okay, so what are some transits that are upcoming that maybe excite you for a new cultural revolution? I have my eye, for example, on Jupiter Uranus 2024. There's a conjunction. It will be on a generational Chiron placement too. Again, I said it's at that 20, I think the conjunction's happening at 21 Taurus, but just right before it gets to 22, where it was for a very long time. So that like is almost telling me like we have a chance to maybe heal some revolutionary wounds in regards to what we know, how we see the world, our ethos, our philosophies. Jupiter Uranus in 83 in Sagittarius was the rise of college rock and REM, and we saw kind of a lot of like magical electronic music kind of evolving into a new romantic style at that time. Like, for example, Porcupine by Echo and the Bunnymen came out that year. Very pivotal record for great, or that the European music. And then like in 97, we do see a lot of feminist rock. Again, we see the Lilith Fair happening that year. With the conjunction, Silverchair's Freak Show came out, a traveling carnival, very Jupiter Uranus. And I think that their message was very much about, regardless of gender, like just like owning who you are and being a total weirdo. So I love that. But yeah, I think Jupiter Uranus is like obviously the one I have my eye on, but I'm curious if you have any other like transits that are exciting you, maybe even talking about like Uranus moving into Gemini and the potential for that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I mean, I'm a Scorpio rising, so I'm definitely got my little eye on the Jupiter Taurus conjunction. And I am excited for it for a multitude of reasons, but I have been thinking a lot about Saturn getting really close to Neptune and Pisces, but then both of them ultimately meeting in Aries. So that to me kind of, I think as Saturn gets closer and closer to Neptune and Pisces, we're going to kind of have this meeting of, what wants to be given form from the formless, right? Like, I feel like Saturn is like, we can draw down from the imaginal realms and create with this really potent raw material. And I feel like the proximity to Neptune as it gets closer, it's like what's going to pass through the veil and come through that door could really be very strange and exciting in interesting ways. But I ultimately think their conjunction in Aries is going to be to me, it looks like a little bit of an interesting moment, partially like a firecracker, and also partially like what will come after this long gestation. So it'll
be squaring, the early millennials who have that. You know what I was thinking kind of about this, just on a like, if we're thinking about like alternatives, like movements that could be coming up. I feel like for me, what sticks out is a lot of people in that generation or people who grew up during that time were involved in like hardcore punk, which was totally about like not refraining from drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And those types of things. And I just think about it in Aries, and I'm always like, I wonder if we'll see like another kind of like minor threat kind of movement kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially because like I find so many people that I know who are straight edge and were involved in that kind of movement have that conjunction, usually having some sort of nice little conversation with the inner planets, such as like Mercury or Venus or Mars. Oftentimes I see that in people who are straight edge.
Yeah. And I wanted to just show you something that I thought was pretty wild if you're interested. And maybe
I'm always interested in the
one last
of astrology.
one last chart. So the inner wheel is Slim Moon, who founded Kill Rockstar Records, who has Venus and Virgo at 7th degrees, born October 15th, 1967. And we have on the Venus retrograde in Virgo, Venus stationing exactly on that degree on August 1st, 1991, when Kill Rock Stars was really starting to, first disseminate, like record and then disseminate these bands. And he was also in his Jupiter return at that time. So I just really loved that. I thought that was really incredible. And Venus then retrogrades back into Leo. And let me see here. Did that work? No, that's Toby Vale's chart. Sorry, one second. There's too many amazing musicians' charts open right now. Okay, and then went Kazemi on his Jupiter, Leo. So that to me, during the international music fest in I put it for Boston, but for Olympia, that to me was just like an incredible like activation of somebody's natal promise and the synastry of their chart. I don't know if you've looked at that, but I just felt like that was like too good not to share.
Awesome. I really thank you for sharing that with us. That's awesome. It's interesting to think about. Again, like everybody has a purpose. Your chart is like waiting to be unlocked, and you can use it for revolution, or you can use it to stick your thumb up your butt, whatever you want to do. It's your life. And Kathleen Hanna fought for our right to stick our thumb up our butt or not.
Or not, yeah. Or do whatever we need to do at the time. Yes. Perfect. Well, thank you for this enjoyable discussion on a topic that I'm excited to keep exploring, because I feel like it's still going to be certainly relevant through this summer and this Venus in retrograde.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of these charts with us and your time. This is a really cool deep dive, and I hope to do more of these in the future. Talking about music is always super exciting for me. We did another episode on the astrology of grunge, which is really kind of the astrology of 90s music. You guys can check that out. I'll link that to you down below. And we're doing another one on 76 punk pretty soon. So I'm really excited for that too. So anytime you guys want to talk about your special interest in music, I am here for it, and I'm creating space. Nice. So where can we find you? Where can we follow you?
Yeah, I'm my website is lauracampagnasastrology.com, and it's getting a little makeover right now, so it'll be even more exciting post Venus retrograde. But you can book with me there, and I'm also on Instagram posting little mundane astrology updates pretty frequently at lauracompagnon.astrology. So yeah, I'd love to connect with folks. And I feel like there is so much going on in the astrological world. And it's really, I love this like kind of take on art and culture. So thanks for creating the space.
Awesome. Well, we will talk soon. Everybody have a great evening and go listen to Bikini Kill or go watch The Punk Singer. It's great.
Yeah,
I
so
binge.
good.
I'll put a link down below. Bye-bye.